Huh? Yes, sir. I don't like the letter. Right, right. Sounds like a plan. Brenda just came.
I am not sure if I have a on 2028, but certainly sit on that committee.
I just looked at fiscal impact. Which one? I already talked to the chairman, Council Moore. Yeah, if you have a fiscal impact of $2.8 million, then it says it needs to go there.
Even there, it's so sad.
We got an update. That's fine.
Huh?
That's fine. We got an update.
Okay. No. Packet?
That's
right. Oh, this is it.
Yeah,
It's thinner than I brought mine over too. Yeah.
I'm glad you did. I'm gonna try to do it in 2 hours.
No, there we go.
I got it. Good. We got this stuff. Keeping us some quorum, I might say. But. We're ready. Okay, we'll start the Agriculture Subcommittee of the Agriculture Committee. And first up on the list is Delegate Bob Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is House Bill 2349. Up until about, I guess, a year and a half ago, a number of states were starting to require labeling of food products sold within their borders with respect to GMO content. Vermont, Maine, and Connecticut have done this. In the meantime, the federal government Congress passed a statute, but there are a number of problems with the statute. While 90% or 89% of Americans surveyed at the time in December 2015 wanted GMO labeling, 88% wanted GMO labeling on the food item itself. What Congress eventually did was to state, okay, we're going to have GMO labeling, but you're going to have to be able to read it with a smartphone. And that was not, that wasn't even on the radar of anybody's support here. So, moreover was a complaint about the use of the smartphone because there was a suspicion, about 80% of these individuals, 800 some people surveyed, that they were worried that in fact the food companies or somebody would be scanning their phone while they were trying to read the GMO contents. So this was an issue of privacy for these individuals. Now, my statute and I'll suggest to you that the governor and the Attorney General's office are not reading the English language correctly. My statute does not add to or subtract from any food items that have been identified by the federal government for future identification for GMO content. It just says, with respect to that a store shall have a reader for people who don't have smartphones, and frankly, I thought that the passage of legislation limiting the information to smartphone users was kind of class-oriented. If I were not a delegate, I wouldn't have a phone like this. I have one of these flip phones that you make phone calls and that's it. So, the overwhelming amount of people wanted hard copy. So my bill here requires that whenever the federal government completes its survey of the foods out there, that a store either have a reader in the store so people can scan a can of food or bread, whatever, or that they have printed contents available for individuals who want to see what the contents of the food would be. Again, it doesn't require more foods to be labeled. It doesn't take away anything. And it also says that on the side of this container, that there's a statement that the federal government will not allow states to require labeling on the side of the food product itself. Now, if this is an objection, I can understand it, but it's not one that's required or that would preclude the enactment of a statute like this. Because we're saying, on the one hand, we're just telling the consumer, Congress won't let us mandate on the side of the label the GMO contents. Secondly, we're not adding or taking away food products. We're just saying whatever the feds come up with, there ought to be a way inside the store for people who don't have smartphones to read it. The other part of this, I've taken from Alaska and the state of Washington. I do not believe that the fish were part of the statute passed by Congress. So these are basically copies of statutes in Washington State and Alaska. And that's it.
Okay, any questions of the patron from the committee? Anyone here to, go ahead. No, Robert, you don't want to give testimony first? Yeah. Anyone here to speak in favor of this measure? Okay. Anyone here to speak in opposition to this measure? Yes, sir.
Jonathan Harding with Virginia Agribusiness Council. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I just want to speak before you today. I recognize the concerns that the delegate brought forth about everybody having access to technology or something of that nature to be able to read the scannable code that's been mandated at the federal level. However, we are still in opposition to this bill. We believe that the state law should not be more stringent than that at the federal level, and we believe that if there are changes that need to be done at the national level, not a patchwork of laws regarding GMO labeling within the states. And then also I believe the national level under the National Bioengineered Food Disclosure Standard that addresses some of the concerns that are brought forth within this bill. It says that not sooner than a year after the federal law has been enacted that the USDA will do a study to identify potential technological challenges that have an impact on if consumers have access to the federal disclosure through digital or electronic methods. So I feel like we should be able to give the federal law, it was just enacted last year, so give it that year to get going and see what happens there. And we believe that we should wait to see what happens there as opposed to taking action now. Kind of, if there's something that needs to be addressed at the end of that, then that's another conversation. But thank you for your time.
Anyone else opposed? Yes, ma'am.
Virginia Farm Bureau also opposes this bill, as for all the reasons previously discussed, it has been a federal policy issue, and we believe that it should be something that is given time to be able to be put in place and work effectively.
Okay. Okay, anyone else here to speak to the measure?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Kevin Schmidt, with the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. The administration does oppose this bill. It's primarily for the reasons mentioned, where the guidance from the federal regulation requires that no state may directly or indirectly establish or continue with any food or seed requirement related to the labeling or disclosure of whether the food or seed is genetically engineered or was developed, and they required that we wait until they settle that at the federal level before we do any state guidance.
Thank you.
Question for the witness.
Sir.
Yes, sir. Delegate Marshall's bill sort of has a carve out of fish, or takes fish where the federal bill did not go. Any comment on that? What does this do to fish aquaculture in Virginia?
I look to my expert over here on fish.
Yeah, I think people, there does not appear to be anything in there regarding fish that I don't think of, so. Okay, thank you. Okay, Delegate Warren?
Mr. Chairman, just to speak to the matter very, very briefly, you know, Bob is agriculture teacher for 38 years. This is a matter that my students bring up, and somehow folks have gotten the impression that because what I'm eating may be genetically modified, somehow that's going to attach to me as it goes through my digestive system. And that then becomes the point of my science part of the class with the students, that when you eat a cow, you don't become a cow. Your body absorbs the nutrients, and there's nothing about the DNA of the cow, whatever breed or whatever, that ever attaches to our species. If you go back and look around the turn of the century, when hybrid crops were first being developed in the agriculture community, almost the exact same types of articles and fears were rampant in society then, that somehow, because we were artificially crossing between plant varieties, we were going to do something to impact on human health. And everything about GMOs, the scientific community has shown they're not a negative as a human food source. On the point of, you know, therefore, if it's not a negative, why shouldn't we still label it if people want to know? That gets to the point that the industry representatives brought forward, that then it becomes a patchwork quilt, and you're holding Virginia businesses liable for information that maybe wasn't provided to them because it wasn't the law in the state of origin. That until it's done in a federally mandated manner, if it's ever done, it truly puts us in a difficult market situation and a disadvantage. So did Delegate Weber have a question? If not, I had a motion whenever the chairman.
I'll second your
Okay.
motion. You ain't know what it is. So you can wrap up.
Number one, with the exception of the fish section, I don't want to add to the list that the federal government has. I simply want to take the information that they have, which they are restricting the dissemination to only people who have smartphones, and give it to the rest of the people who maybe are on food stamps or who don't have enough money to buy a smartphone, and let them just have the same information. I can accept the representations of my colleague about the science. I'm not disputing any of that, but the public has the concern to want to know that. Congress did respond, at least in part, to the concern of the content or of the food. But they restricted it in, I frankly think, a class warfare type manner, only to people who have smartphones. So this is for the rest of us who don't have smartphones. And it just says, take the information that the feds have and make it available either in, one, by a scanner, or two, by printed information. And if you don't like the cute little ad that I put on there, basically twitting Congress for not letting the states do this, remove that section from the bill.
Delegate Warren?
Mr. Chairman, I move to lay on the table.
Second. It's not debatable. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Pogge. Brenda?
Thank you.
2398.
What is it, and do you have a extra copy? It's there is an amendment made to the substitute. Is there an extra copy?
We'll get you. Is that in paper?
Yeah.
It's not on pen paper.
Brenda, did you bring us samples this year, like last year?
Any chocolate seeds?
Yeah, you had good samples last year.
I don't have any candy bars this year.
Harvey Morgan used to bring brownies.
Yeah, this year it was brownies.
You weren't here for that, were you?
That's still legal.
Okay.
It's under 20 bucks. Hold on just a minute, Brenda. We're going to give people a chance to. Okay, let's get the substitute before us.
Who was up to substitute?
Second.
Okay. All in favor of substitute, say aye. Okay. Substitute before us.
Okay.
Delegate Pogge.
Okay, what House Bill 2398 will do is it will further expand
right now to get pilot programs going for commercial industrial hemp growth. And what we're seeing now in our neighboring states is the move way ahead of us to get industrial hemp ready for when the feds actually start growth now on pilot research programs before the feds, which we do expect, to take it off the controlled substance list. But in the meantime, if you look, Kentucky, hemp is the new tobacco. And basically the allure to states that are primarily tobacco states is hemp. Because tobacco crops have gone way down in production, the demand for tobacco has gone way down, but the demand for hemp is going up. And right now, the only place we can get it is from other countries. Virginia did have the first hemp crop in decades. They also harvested this year, but our research plots were only 37 acres, is all we produced. In Kentucky, they did 2,300 acres, and they expect they'll double that next year. Colorado has done about 7,300 acres, and they right now are the largest producer of industrial commercial hemp. We've had this conversation before, so we know there's virtually no THC in industrial hemp, and what we're doing is trying to get a policy that is conducive to everyone, that will free up some more farmers getting into the game and expanding the amount of acres that we are now growing. Hemp is being sold right now by a couple of companies. You can sell it in Virginia. You can manufacture things out of it in Virginia, but you just cannot grow it because we haven't set the groundwork to grow it, to expand. So that's what the bill does. A companion bill to this has already passed the Senate. Joe Vogel's bill passed the committee unanimously and the full Senate unanimously. And so I do have someone here who will explain just what the bill does, how it affects what we're doing now, and that we have put in provisions and are willing to make amendments to expand what we can do in Virginia, the amount of acreages. We can get seed to growers who have their licenses and put in the apparatus to get their licenses. So let me get someone here, Jason.
The way we're gonna do this is, we all sat in the committee the other day, and we had about 45 minutes of learning about this, and we've been going through this for a few years anyways, as the delegate knows. And then, since it's been in production, we talked to the grower. Some of y'all may have been there, but we're fairly well educated on this. So if you don't mind, we'd love for you to speak to us, but please don't be redundant. Just give us some more information if you don't mind. Bobby, did you have a question before they started?
Well, it's about the construction and the substitute. Brenda, you added a whole nother section here, 4120, relating to the institutions.
Germaine's issue, Bobby?
What page?
Well, line 153, page 6, where we've taken out that the effect of what I've seen that section's done is taken out where it starts off with adequate, as adequate funds are available. And when we strike that, and then on page 8, add the language on 199-201, that if the fees aren't there, the department's got to suck it up out of their budget.
So we've got a fiscal impact statement on this, and the chairman of appropriations told me if this bill sees favor here, it's got to go to approach.
Well, I guess I was trying to potentially germane this question on this part, but absent your being able to tell me how that relates to the pilot program, when that was the research component of the original legislation and had nothing to do with the pilots, I'm curious why that piece is in the substitute.
Okay.
And absent that, I would suggest we may want to amend the substitute by striking everything from there on.
In line 22, it says industrial hemp research program means a research program established pursuant to 3.2-4115 or 3.2-4121.
And I understand you've changed the definition, which also wasn't in your original bill, And the original bill was relating to pilot program and license of those, which had nothing to do with the research component over here in title, where did I find it? Yeah, 420.
May I speak to that, sir?
Well,
Can he-
if he can convince me it's germane under the title, you know.
Well, Mr. Chairman.
We have a germaneness issue, so don't go to the bill, let's go to the germaneness issue. Because Delegate Horrock says they're two separate things. Okay?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jason Amatucci with the Virginia Industrial
See,
Coalition.
hear what he said?
The research pilot program that's the same thing. Basically, we have the law from the federal government, the U.S. Farm Bill, that is opening up the research that agriculture departments can lend licensed farmers. So Kentucky is licensing farmers. So we've got two aspects of this bill. One, to open it up to everybody, but it's under marketing and research, so it falls under the same umbrella. But we're talking about two different types with institutions of higher learning.
Will,
Okay.
you've convinced us on the germaneness issue. Okay, now,
Gotcha.
would you like to continue to speak to the bill?
Sure, I actually
Okay.
just wanted, I know you're educated on this, we've done this
Yeah.
before, so I didn't want to waste your time. I just want to say if there's any questions, but I wanted to point out that there are two aspects. We have a bottleneck right now. If we rely on our universities to give this to our farmers, it's not happening right now. We have Kentucky, 200 licenses, 13,000 acres this year. And right now we've got 37 acres. Maybe we're going to increase that a little bit this year, but we have a bottleneck at our universities because they're not opening it up to our farmers. It's their decision if they want to work with private farmers. What we like to do is ask VDACs to license directly like they do in Kentucky with the farmers that apply under most of the same regulations and have them go through everything, but then they're allowed to grow on their own and they can still work with the university if they like. You have that flexibility. But it doesn't make the university have to say, oh, we're going to have a memorandum of understanding with you directly. We'll have a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Agriculture.
Okay. I think we're pretty clear on that. Thank you. Anybody else? Delegate Weber.
Delegate Fogey, what are the primary differences between your substitute and your regional bill?
Well, the primary differences that I'm gonna resort to Jason here too, because, when Senator Vogel put hers into the Senate, the bill was still being worked and amended, and you know what we do around here, we make sausage. So now mine actually is, identical to hers, so whatever changes she made, those are the reasons mine got amended, I just got it yesterday afternoon. So I don't know the differences, but maybe Jason can explain this question.
Well, you want to ask him?
Yes, okay. Lines 120, 121. Section C, processed unprocessed industrial hemp from the industrial hemp research program may be sold within and outside of the Commonwealth as part of marketing research. Who does the marketing research and where would it be sold outside of the Commonwealth?
You have the right to sell this outside of the Commonwealth to another license holder through the Farm Bill, through federal law, because you can transport it through state lines. That's in 7606 of the code. Now you can sell it in the state through marketing research. It would be VDAC's marketing research umbrella. So that's.
So VDACs would be the ones to administer the marketing
They have to
research?
administer this program, yes, because that's how the chain of command comes down from the federal government. Yeah. But we also have in additional hemp licenses for when the government does legalize this, federal government, then it opens it up for other licenses. That you don't have to go through the Farm Bill.
Delegate Weber, you only get 3 now.
Now you gotta make me think. Okay, so under the marketing research, if it were to expand to the number of growers and licenses and the marketing research done by VDACs, what would be the incurred cost of VDACs, and are they staffed well enough to be able to handle this kind of increase?
Right, that's probably a better question for them, but they do have an impact statement, I believe, on similar. What we did was try to take the themes of the original bill, so I think it was 208,000, but I think they can speak to that a little better.
Okay, all right, I was just curious.
Mr. Chairman, I asked this question before. I didn't know if anyone on the committee heard that we got the presentation that a drug sniffing dog cannot tell the difference between this and did I hear them correct say that? Do we have anyone that they'd have to be trained to tell the difference between this and?
I think I heard that.
Yeah.
just, and that just poses another question, Mr. Chairman. I'm all for giving my farmers, more products, but I wanna make sure there's a way to make sure that my farmer doesn't get stopped on the side of the road and DEA agents don't cuff him. And then he's calling me and without having a true test. I mean, it's kind of, we're going into uncharted territories. I just wanna make sure that we don't run too fast.
It's going to be tested, the seed is tested to make sure of the THC content. It has to be below 0.03%. And then the farms are subject at any time to be inspected by the state police, by BDACs. So there will be measures, plus I believe that GPS coordinates and proof of land ownership are provided to BDAC, so we know just exactly where their permission and their license allows them to grow, and then that information is given to state police. And so we have set up a situation where there's a lot of accountability and that there's very little wiggle room, because if you don't know, it's also true that industrial hemp will neutralize a crop of marijuana and reduce its THC level.
Yes, sir, Mr. That's the wonderful part about it, but the problem I envision is once you leave the farm, if you're selling it within the state or outside the state, and I have it in bales, and my farmer gets stopped away from the farm, just happens to have the drug dog in there, canine, we've got issues that we would make sure that something, we need to make sure in the bill that this is covered.
He's got a license. He presents his license.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Kevin Schmidt again with Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. We don't have, the agency does not have a position, the administration does not have a position on the substitute bill. We did oppose, the administration does oppose the bill as introduced, and I think I can speak to maybe some of the same concerns from that original bill that I think are still valid, if that's okay. And I'll hit on a few that I believe you all are talking about. Mentioned certified industrial hemp seed, and one of the concerns the agency does have is that I think what's intended here is a discussion of certification that the seed has a certain THC level. In Virginia, there is a definition in the Virginia seed law that speaks to what certified seed is. This is kind of what's your understanding in terms of how close the generation is to the breeding seed, and there's a definition in the seed law of certified. It does not recognize certified for THC, it's just certified for how pure that seed is and the percentages in there. So I think there could be some conflicts with certified seed law in using that term certified. I think there are some questions as to who would actually, under this proposed substitute, who would monitor and enforce for THC content. Right now, it's permissive that the commissioner would be the person testing for the THC, but the bill requires that the THC process be the one that's identified in subsection H. I think there's confusion maybe as to who actually would be testing for the THC, at least if it's through the Industrial Hemp Research Program. The question of the unprocessed or the processed hemp leaving across state lines, the guidance from DEA and USDA that came out a few months ago does have some pretty clear language that states it is okay for the purpose of marketing research, but not for the purpose of general commercial activity, to have industrial hemp products sold in a state that has an agricultural program to another state that has an agricultural program, and that's the processed product. I think with including unprocessed products in here, the DEA is not allowed to transfer without a DEA import transfer permit across state lines of the unprocessed product, and I think that might be what we'd be opening ourselves up to with that inclusion of unprocessed here. And then, as you mentioned, there certainly are some concerns as well too, about the fiscal impacts of this, and particularly the provision requiring the agency to meet all the costs associated with that. We have about $15,000 we were able to scrape together to administer the program this year and to get a limited amount of seed, and that was a tough stretch. There is a fiscal impact associated with this bill. I'll answer any questions.
We've got it in front of us. Okay, thank you. Anyone else here to speak to this measure?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
My name is David Osmond. I'm with the Department of State Police, and the department has a couple of concerns with regard regards to this bill, namely in the area of marijuana eradication. With the industrial hemp grows, our eradication efforts would be stymied, whereby there's no way for us to readily identify what crops without a notification procedure to the Department of State Police that an industrial hemp grow is underway. From the air, law enforcement efforts would be to seek a search warrant and search that property without being able to readily identifiable, without the crops being readily identifiable. And likewise, to the delegates concerned a moment ago, if this product, this grown product is going down the road, there would likewise be no way for law enforcement to readily identify whether this is marijuana or whether this is industrial hemp. And with that could come some serious consequences with regards to a criminal investigation and or search. So with that, the department would like to see a notification process, potentially a fingerprint-based background check, and the ability to inspect the industrial grow to determine whether or not any marijuana is being grown.
Thank you. We've kind of, Brenda, we've talked about this for years, growing hemp, you know, and we finally got it in here, and it's become law now, about 7 months, I guess, if I'm right, you know. So we just made it legal last July 1, because there wasn't special legislation or emergency legislation. So from what I'm hearing, everybody talking, this is kind of in its infancy, and no one really knows kind of where to go. Sometimes things, you know how we move so slow in Virginia, it takes us a while to percolate. You know, I know. So anyways, if there's no one else here to speak to the measure, any discussion within the committee or a motion?
Make a comment.
Okay, Delegate Poindexter.
Well, there's obviously some technical issues with the bill in Virginia. On the other hand, its fiscal impact should go upstairs, so I don't know why we'd want to send it up to appropriations since the bill has some deficiencies from the state police and VDAC. So I think I'm going to move to just table the bill here.
Okay. I'll accept that motion. Do I have a second to the motion to table the bill? Mike?
No, I'm just
Awesome. Or Delegate Ora? Okay. That dies the life of a motion. Okay. Do I have a motion?
I would move to recommend reporting and referring to appropriation.
Do I have a second to that motion? Okay. There's a motion to report, to substitute, and refer to appropriations. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. No. So there's 2 no's. Charles Poindexter and myself. Okay. The bill reports.
Thank you.
Thank you. Elliot, you may as well go into that one, so there's no pressure on mine.
While we're on it,
Okay.
let's just go in and stay on it.
Which bill number is that?
It's 2028.
Okay. Do you have?
Yeah, there's a significant, so,
Do you have a substitute?
yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I believe the substitute is before you, and there is, one line amendment to that.
It's a line.
Okay, let's get the substitute before us, and is that within the package?
No,
the
it's
substitute?
just an amendment to the original bill.
So we have an amendment, not a
Just-
substitute?
just one.
Okay.
Well, I know, I think we did send you a substitute, and then there was a line amendment to that substitute.
Actually, the substitute can be boiled down to these 2 amendments.
Okay.
Very efficient.
And,
Mr. Chairman?
let me get the bill before me. Which number was it again?
2028.
2028, okay, thank you. And has everyone got that? Yes, sir. Could you report the line number, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, on House Bill 2028, there are 2 line amendments. First is on page 1, line 44. At subsection B there, this amendment would strike all of subsection B, beginning with nothing in this chapter, ending with the extent of the conflict. And it would renumber or rename those subsections accordingly. The second line amendment is on the very end of the bill. It would add a new enactment clause, numbered 3, and it would say that the provisions of this act shall become effective on July 1, 2018, so it's delayed enactment.
Move the
So
amendment.
just as a relief.
Second.
Okay, the amendments are before us. All in favor, say aye. Okay, the amendments are now before us. Okay, we have the bill as amended, Elder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So essentially what this does is we're taking, the goal of this is essentially deregulate the growing of industrial hemp. The reason why we put the delayed enactment clause on it is for two reasons. One is obviously there was a fiscal impact that was assigned to this. Now, I have some issues with the fiscal impact. It came from the Department of Forensic Services. And what they were saying was that in order, the way I understood it, was in order to keep pace with the way that they're currently testing to determine if something is marijuana as opposed to industrial hemp, it would require another 22 analysts, right? So they already have the equipment that they need to do it, but if you wanted to keep pace with what they anticipate, future requirements would be, that would require 22 analysts. So, again, we can argue back and forth with this. My point is that this isn't the kind of fiscal impact like we're removing a tax and we know we're not going to collect $2.8 million in revenue. This is the idea that theoretically they will need additional analysts. The other reason why we put the delayed enactment clause on this is because we obviously want to give the federal government a chance to catch up with Virginia. That's where we want to go with this. You guys have already sat through numerous briefs with respect to the economic impact that this could have, especially for some areas of Virginia right now that are not doing so well economically. Not to mention the fact that, again, it's much more environmentally planned than some of the other things we could be putting out there. So by pushing this until July of 2018, we send the message to the federal government, which I think needs to be sent, that, again, Virginia wants to get going with this. We want to make this accessible to all of our farmers, not just through, farmers within a particular program. With respect to some of the concerns with marijuana, the only thing I would say is that I get a little bit frustrated, I guess, when I see them smoking it in Colorado, Maine, California, Washington, and Washington, D.C., which for those of us keeping score at home is the home of the federal government, and yet the DEA is not jumping out of airplanes arresting, the entire populations of these places. Pacific Fleet is not shelling San Francisco. The world has not exploded. They're smoking it. We just want to wear it. So I think on some level here, we have the potential to give Virginia farmers a jump on the rest of the country with this. And I think there's also, we need to look at the economic impact of what happens if we're doing this 3, 4, 5 years after everybody else. So the goal is, again, to send the signal to the federal government that we want to move toward deregulation and expanding the farmers that this is available to. But we're going to have a whole nother session to take a look at this, a whole nother session to take a look at what's going on in order to determine whether or not that's the appropriate course of action.
Delegate, you were here for Delegate Hoagie's.
I sure was.
The chairman came and said, irregardless, it's going to have to go upstairs. So I want everyone in the committee to know it has a fiscal impact. Whether we agree with it or not, you may whittle it down $1 million or $2 million, which is probably going to have a fiscal impact on the thing. So, anyways, is anyone here to speak to this measure that has any new or different information? Because we still heard you. Yes, ma'am. We'll let her come forward.
Thank you. I'm Linda Jackson. I'm the director of the Department of Forensic Science, and I just wanted to be able to answer any questions you might have on that fiscal impact. It comes from the fact that marijuana is defined currently as not including industrial hemp if it is from a licensed grower. If you remove that licensure, you remove the affirmative defense that is available, so that with every marijuana sample that is submitted to us, we will have to prove then, instead of it's just marijuana, that it is not industrial hemp. And that does include additional testing that we do not currently do. Thank you.
Thank you. That helps clarify.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, just on that point, is it that the science and technology is out there, but we just don't have it in Virginia, or is it that it's impossible to do that?
Oh, it's definitely not impossible to do the testing, but it's not required under Virginia law now, or federal law for that matter. And so now we would have to do it if someone did have a license and they said, no, it is industrial hemp, it is not marijuana, and they put that license forward. We would then have to test the marijuana to prove that the concentration of THC was over that 0.03% that Delegate Hoagie spoke of. And so it's just not required, and so therefore we don't have to do it, and we just don't have the resources in place.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. So, Delegate Frias.
I'm trying to wrap my head because we have two very distinct bills, I believe. Hoagie still involves a licensure. Yours removes the licensure?
That would take effect in July of 2018.
Okay, so those are, I guess, is that the primary difference between Mobile and Merchant?
Yeah, absolutely. Mine seeks to, I want to get to the point where we treat hemp more like a regular agricultural crop instead of something associated with narcotics or drugs. But again, we realize that there's going to need to be a process for that. And so, I think Senator Vogel's bill and Senate Delegate Hoagie's bill in the House helps us get to that process to where hopefully, beginning 2018, we're more comfortable.
Chairman, question?
Yes, sir.
Staff.
Yes, sir.
Doc, does this bill put us in conflict with federal law?
Mr. Chairman, it's hard to say because of things that several people have mentioned regarding the absence of federal enforcement and continuing changes in the Farm Bill. Just because we remove the portion that says that we're not in conflict doesn't mean that we're automatically in conflict.
For Colorado?
You could say that, but yes, sir.
Wait, are you done?
Okay, so, Delegate Poe's bill had, aspects to it that say involved certified seed, any of that. Is that still in these provisions where a grower would have to purchase certified seed from somebody just to ensure that, hey, I've got certified seed, et cetera, or is this just a licensure deregulation?
It's deregulation.
Okay, so just flat out no license. Okay.
Any other questions? Anyone else here to speak to the measure? Yes, sir.
I'm not an expert. I assume it's my turn to speak. I'm an individual from Farmville, Richard Altus. I see on Facebook almost daily where more and more states are deregulating marijuana itself. I realize it's still the law of the land that it's illegal, but I do believe that sooner rather than later it could be deregulated. So I certainly hope that you'll take that in consideration. I think this bill also takes that within consideration as it puts things off for a year. And who knows what the new Trump administration is going to do in the meantime with marijuana. So it could be tomorrow deregulate. I don't know. We don't know. That's in the future. But I know with some of the things with the state police we're worried about when a person has been given a GPS label as that farm at these coordinates are raising hemp, and he's got a helicopter in the air. They go by GPS. I don't see why they have a problem identifying places that are marked as having marijuana and places that don't. And just like with the road stop, I don't know what a bale of marijuana looks like, but I do know what a bale of hay looks like, and I don't know this could be that much different. And so far, the state police has been tight enough on marijuana production that I don't think they go get a tractor and a baler in there and bale their crop and put it on a truck and have it going down 95, where the legal hemp grower will be doing that. He'll put it as a bale and on a truck going down. So anyway, I think my main point is, rather than look so much in the past, we should look more to the future. This is certainly a thing that is changing on the horizon. And I am in support of this bill.
Okay, committee, what's your pleasure?
I move to recommend reporting and referring.
To appropriations. We'll have a second.
Second.
Okay, there's a second. Okay, any discussion? All in favor of the motion to report and refer, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No.
No, I'm a yes.
Same score. Thank you, Delegate.
So-
It's going upstairs.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, next bill. Hold on a second.
Yeah, Major, very briefly, I appreciate your comments, sir, but I gotta say, this is about 10, 15 years ago in Spotsylvania County, there were 4 or 5 farmers that were arrested because they had established their marijuana plot in the middle of the cornfield and had gone out there with the New Holland rake and balers. And